A desperate single mom takes a job bathing a cold-hearted billionaire. His first words. You're not even worth looking at. But what happens next will leave him begging on his knees. Don't blink. Rain tapped lightly against the window pane of the small apartment as Emma Walker stood by the sink, washing the last of the dinner dishes. Her fingers were cracked from the cold, her back sore from the double shift she had pulled at the local diner. Still, she worked silently, her mind already wandering to tomorrow's to-do list. Rent was due in 5 days. Lucas needed new school shoes. The power bill hadn't been paid. Again. At 8 years old, her son Lucas was already too aware of sacrifice. He didn't complain when the heat clicked off early or when dinner was just toast and eggs for the 3rd night in a row. He would just smile, tell her stories about school, and ask questions like, do all rich people have golden bathtubs? She would chuckle and say, maybe, but a warm hug is worth more than all the gold in the world. Tonight, though, something was different. As she dried her hands and stepped into their shared living space, a letter sat on the counter, a hospital envelope with bold black lettering. It was from the medical agency where she occasionally picked up temp work. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a 1-page assignment sheet. Private care request, immediate need, exclusive client, high compensation. The address was in the city's upscale district, an entirely different world. She almost tossed it aside, assuming it was a mistake. But then, her eyes locked on the hourly wage. It was more than she made in a week. Later that night, as Lucas slept beside her in their shared bedroom, Emma stared at the ceiling. Could she take it? Was it real? A wealthy client, likely someone picky and impossible to please. She had worked with high-maintenance people before, and they rarely treated her like a person. But the money. The money could buy Lucas winter clothes. The money could stop the endless cycle of fear that gripped her every end of the month. The next morning, Emma dressed in her best, still just a clean sweater and worn slacks, and caught a bus to the address. She stepped off in front of a towering steel and glass building that practically sparkled against the gray sky. Her breath caught in her throat. A doorman opened the door without a word. She was nobody here, yet everything about the place whispered luxury, power, and things far out of her reach. She was directed to the penthouse suite. When the elevator doors opened, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit greeted her. You must be Miss Walker. I'm Charles, Mr. Thatcher's personal assistant. Thank you for seeing me, she replied nervously, clutching her folder of credentials. He gestured for her to follow him down a long hallway. Our employer is recovering from an accident. He needs light assistance with mobility, bathing, and meals. He's particular. But we're offering a generous rate for discretion and full-time presence. Emma's eyebrows lifted. Bathing? Yes, Charles said, pausing outside a large double door. He has a fractured leg. The nurse is here only part-time. We need someone to assist him with daily hygiene. He is aware of the terms. Before Emma could speak, the doors opened, and she saw him. Ethan Thatcher. She recognized him instantly, from magazines and news articles. A tech mogul, once hailed as a genius, recently in the headlines for disappearing after a near-fatal car crash. He was sitting in a wheelchair, his right leg in a cast, wearing a plain gray hoodie and sweatpants. But his presence was undeniable. Tall, lean, sharp eyes, and a jawline sculpted by nature or fate. His gaze flicked to her, assessing. You're the caregiver. Emma nodded. Emma Walker. He looked at her for a moment too long. Not with cruelty, just interest. You look surprised, he said, voice dry. I wasn't expecting. She hesitated, then finished honestly. You. A ghost of a smirk crossed his face. They told me it'd be someone discreet, not someone who'd faint at the sight of a penthouse. I don't faint, Emma said, holding his gaze. There was a beat of silence, then Ethan nodded once. All right, Let's get this over with. Over. The next hour, Charles explained the schedule, the compensation, the conditions. Full-time, live-in, no press, and absolute privacy. Emma's room would be next to Ethan's, but she would have full access to the kitchen and lounge. She could bring Lucas after school hours if needed. The offer was almost too good to be true. But then again, the discomfort in Ethan's voice, the sharp edges in his tone, they hinted at something broken beyond just a fractured leg. Emma signed the agreement. By evening, she had packed a small suitcase and returned with Lucas, who stared wide-eyed at the apartment that looked like it belonged in a movie. He asked Ethan, "Do you really live here all by yourself?" To which Ethan replied, "It's not as fun as it looks." That first night, Emma helped Ethan bathe. It was clinical, awkward, and quiet. She kept her gaze focused and her tone professional, never once letting herself acknowledge how vulnerable he looked or how close they were. Ethan didn't speak, but she noticed how his jaw clenched when she touched the scars on his side. Later, as she tucked Lucas into the guest bedroom, she sat beside him, smoothing his hair. "Are we staying here forever?" he whispered. Emma smiled, softly. "No, just for a while, until we find something better." "Do you like the man with the sad eyes?" She blinked. "Sad eyes?" Lucas nodded. "He talks like his heart is tired." Emma didn't know how to answer that. In the following days, she learned that Ethan rarely left his room. He kept the curtains closed, ate in silence, watched the news obsessively, but never commented on it. He had no visitors, no phone calls. His company had been left to a board of directors during his recovery. But gradually, something shifted. One morning. Emma left Lucas's drawing, a bright picture of the city skyline, on the counter. That evening, she found it on Ethan's nightstand. Another day, Lucas asked Ethan to play a board game. Ethan declined, but the next day, he watched them from the hallway. Emma never pried. She never asked about the accident or why he lived like a ghost in his own palace. But she was kind, patient, honest. And Ethan noticed. One night, after a particularly long silence, he finally said, "Why did you take this job?" She paused before replying, "Because my son deserves more than I can give, and I'm not ashamed of doing whatever it takes to make that happen." Ethan looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a stranger, but as someone who had fought battles he could never imagine. "I think you're the first person in months who doesn't." "Look at me like I'm broken," he said quietly. Emma swallowed hard. "That's because I don't believe you are." Something changed that night. The walls Ethan had built so carefully began to crack, and Emma, simple, strong, and full of grace, stepped through the cracks without ever trying to. Neither of them knew then, but that first moment of real connection would be the beginning of something neither could have foreseen. Because sometimes the most unexpected relationships are born not from desire but from survival, from trust, from two people who've been hurt by the world, finding in each other something worth fighting for. And though Ethan Thatcher had everything money could buy, it was the woman who bathed him with dignity and treated him with humanity who would remind him what it meant to live. Emma had always believed that healing didn't come in grand moments. It came in the quiet ones, the unspoken acts of kindness, the spaces between words, the stillness after pain. And over the next few weeks, that belief was tested in ways she never expected. Ethan Thatcher remained a man of silence, cloaked in isolation. But something about Emma's presence, her patience, her steady hands, her unwavering sense of calm, began to unsettle him. Not in a way that threatened, but in a way that made him feel again. She didn't flinch when he snapped at her out of frustration. She didn't pity him when he struggled with his walker or growled in pain during therapy. She simply stood by, unwavering, without judgment. She didn't treat him like a millionaire. She didn't treat him like a charity case either. She treated him like a man trying, perhaps failing, but still trying. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled softly in the distance, Emma entered his room with a tray of tea and a fresh towel. She found him sitting near the window for the first time, his cast leg propped up, his eyes trained on the grey city skyline. He didn't turn when she entered. "You know," he said quietly, "people used to write stories about me, pages and pages. The ruthless genius. The mind behind the empire. I've read every word. None of them ever got it right." Emma placed the tray down gently. "And what would the real story say?" He looked over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "That I built everything because I had nothing. That the empire didn't make me powerful. It made me empty." She didn't speak, just listened. Because sometimes, that was what broken people needed most. Space to say the words they'd never said aloud. He turned back to the window. "Do you ever feel like you've been holding your breath for years, and you're scared that if you finally exhale, everything will collapse?" Her voice came softly. "Every day." Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them looked away. That night, Ethan didn't call her to help with his nightly routine. Instead, he texted her, for the first time. "Thank you for seeing me." Emma sat in her room staring at the message. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some things were better left to linger in silence. Over the next few weeks, Lucas became a light in the penthouse. He had a way of cracking through the walls Ethan had spent years building. Whether it was asking him why he didn't smile more or challenging him to a game of chess he didn't know how to play, Lucas was fearless, unfiltered, and in his innocence, he offered Ethan something no one else had: trust without condition. Emma began to notice how Ethan watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. How his eyes lingered a moment too long when she laughed with Lucas. How he seemed to stand a little taller on the days she praised his efforts in therapy. Slowly, the bitter edge to his voice softened. The way he carried himself shifted. Less resentment, more curiosity. One evening after dinner, Emma found Ethan at the piano in the lounge. He wasn't playing, just pressing keys gently, as if reminding his fingers what beauty sounded like. "You play?" she asked. He nodded. "Used to. My mother taught me when I was a kid. She said music is the only language that doesn't lie." Emma stepped closer. "Will you play something?" He looked down at the keys. "I haven't in years. Then maybe it's time." He stared at the keys a moment longer before slowly beginning a simple melody. It was hesitant at first, like a man trying to remember who he used to be. But then the music grew steadier, fuller. Emma stood still, her heart catching in her throat. When he finished, he glanced over, and for the first time there was a flicker of something in his eyes: vulnerability, pride, fear. Emma clapped gently. "You haven't forgotten." That was beautiful. Ethan gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "It's not the hands. It's the mind that forgets how to feel." "You just did," she replied softly. After that night, something between them shifted irreversibly. They didn't speak of it. They didn't need to. The air between them held the weight of everything unsaid. But not everything was soft edges and growing warmth. One morning, Emma overheard a phone call. Ethan's voice was low, tight with tension. He was speaking to someone from the board of his company. There was a lawsuit, questions about the accident, whispers of betrayal. His empire wasn't just shaken, it was crumbling. Emma didn't ask, but he knew she knew. And that night, he finally broke the silence. "They think I'm done," he said, staring at the ceiling from his bed. like I'm some broken relic they can discard. "You're not done," Emma said, handing him a cup of tea. "You're healing. Do you know what happens when a man like me shows weakness?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "He learns who actually cares." He looked at her, startled by the simplicity of her answer. "And what if I don't deserve care?" "Then, maybe it's time you start believing you do." The next day, Ethan asked her if she would accompany him downstairs, to the lobby. It was a small request, but symbolic. He hadn't left the penthouse in over 2 months. Emma said yes. He changed into slacks and a sweater. She wheeled him to the private elevator. In the lobby, the staff straightened at the sight of him. Some whispered, others stared, but Emma didn't flinch. She walked beside him, her head high. Outside, the city was cold and alive. Ethan closed his eyes as the breeze hit his face. When he opened them, he looked at Emma. Not with gratitude, but with awe. "I forgot what this felt like," he whispered. Emma smiled. "You're allowed to come back to life." That evening, as she helped him settle into bed, he touched her hand lightly. "Emma," he said, his voice quiet but sure, "if I asked you to stay, not just for the job, would you?" She froze. He wasn't asking for love, not yet. But something in his voice trembled with hope. She looked at him, her heart both frightened and open. "I'm here, Ethan," she said, softly. "That hasn't changed." He didn't press further. But in that small promise, something profound passed between them. Neither of them was ready to name it. But both knew. It was real. And for the first time in years, Ethan Thatcher fell asleep not with pain in his chest, but with peace. Ethan had never been the kind of man to second-guess himself. His life had been one calculated decision after another, each choice designed to build his empire and protect the fortress around his heart. But ever since Emma entered his life, the certainty he once wore like armor had begun to crack. It wasn't just her calm resilience or the quiet way she seemed to understand his pain without asking for explanations. It was her presence. Unwavering, unapologetic, and utterly unlike anything he had expected. One evening, the sky was bruised with the color of dusk as Ethan sat by the piano, absently touching the keys. Emma entered the room carrying a bowl of soup, her face flushed from the warmth of the kitchen. She placed the tray down and stood beside him, saying nothing at first. "Play something?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not tonight. My hands. They don't feel steady." Emma hesitated, then reached down and placed her hand over his. "It doesn't have to be perfect, just honest." Ethan looked up at her, something unreadable in his gaze. Then, without a word, he played. It was a fragmented melody, broken and beautiful in its imperfection. Emma closed her eyes and let herself feel it. Not just the music, but the ache behind every note. When he finished, there was silence. She opened her eyes and he was watching her. "Why do you stay?" he asked. She blinked, surprised. "Because I said I would." That's not an answer. Emma lowered herself to the couch across from him, searching for the truth in herself. "Because for the first time in a long time, I feel needed, and not just for what I do, but for who I am." His throat tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though accepting something fragile he couldn't yet name. But even as their connection deepened, life outside the penthouse grew more complicated. Ethan's legal team had been sending increasingly urgent messages. His absence from board meetings raised questions. His partners were restless, investors skeptical. And somewhere in the background, whispers of betrayal loomed. Someone from his inner circle had leaked documents, and a major deal was unraveling because of it. Ethan tried to ignore the chaos, but the weight of it pressed against him daily. One morning, Emma walked into the study to find him standing, gripping the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. "You shouldn't be on your feet like that," she said, rushing to his side. He didn't answer. His jaw was clenched, his chest rising and falling in heavy silence. She touched his arm. "Ethan, I trusted them," he said through gritted teeth. "And now they're carving me up like vultures." Emma took a slow breath. "Then don't let them see you fall. Stand up in front of them even if you're trembling inside. You taught me once that power isn't about what you have, it's what you believe." He stared at her, the fight in his eyes tempered by something softer. Gratitude. Respect. Later that day, Emma overheard a call Ethan didn't know she was close enough to catch. His voice was sharp, cutting, a man desperate to salvage his life's work. "No, I don't care what the board says," he snapped. "You tell them I'll be at the meeting next week, and if they're going to vote me out, they'll have to. Do it while looking me in the eyes." Emma stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. She knew the stakes. Knew that returning to the lion's den too soon could cost him not just his company, but his dignity. But she also knew that Ethan wasn't just fighting for his legacy anymore. He was fighting to reclaim a version of himself that had long been buried. That night, over dinner, he was quiet. Emma served the food, trying to fill the silence with light conversation, but he wasn't present. Finally, she asked, "What are you thinking?" He looked up, and for the first time in days, he let her see the fear behind his composure. "That I might lose everything. And I'm not sure what that makes me if I do." She reached across the table, resting her hand over his. "You're not the things you've built, Ethan. You're the man who kept building even after he lost the strength to stand." For a moment it seemed like he might cry, but he didn't. Instead, he turned his hand over and gently held hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The next morning brought unexpected joy. Lucas burst into the room waving a crumpled piece of paper. "Mom, Mr. Ethan, my drawing won the contest at school." Emma scooped him into her arms, laughing. Ethan smiled too, genuinely, the tension in his face softening. "What did you draw?" Ethan asked. Lucas grinned. "A big building with lots of people helping each other. I called it the Kind Tower." Emma looked at Ethan, eyes twinkling. "Sounds like a place you'd invest in," he chuckled. "Maybe I already have." The warmth in the room was real, and for the first time it didn't feel like any of them were pretending. Later that week, Ethan insisted on walking without assistance down the hallway. Emma protested, worried, but he was determined. "Let me fall," he said. "If I'm going to stand in front of the board again, I need to know I can do it on my own." And he did. Each step was shaky, deliberate. But with Emma walking beside him, just close enough to catch him if he slipped, he made it. When they reached the end of the hallway, Ethan stopped, chest heaving, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Emma replied, "I think you were the one who needed to stop giving up on yourself." That night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Ethan knocked on her door, not for help, but for conversation. "I can't sleep," he said. "Neither can I," Emma admitted. They sat in the living room with cups of tea between them. The world outside was quiet. The world between them was anything but. "I keep thinking about that day," Ethan said after a long pause. "The accident, the argument, the decision that led me into that car. If I had made one different choice, none of this would have happened." Emma looked at him carefully. "Then maybe it was meant to happen." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She held his gaze. "Sometimes pain isn't punishment. Sometimes it's a doorway. And maybe it led you here so you could find something more important than power." Ethan didn't speak, but his eyes shimmered with something close to tears. Later, when they said goodnight, their fingers brushed briefly. Neither pulled away. It wasn't love, Not yet. But it was the kindling of something real, something deeper than the scars they both carried. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of them felt alone. The days that followed Ethan's first steps without support marked the beginning of a quiet transformation, not just in his recovery, but in the way he began to interact with the world around him. Emma noticed it, first in the subtle ways. The way he started waking earlier, asking to sit by the window, requesting books from the library he hadn't touched in years. There was a hunger in him again, a search for purpose that extended beyond business and boardrooms. Emma found herself folding his shirts one afternoon, something she'd done 100 times before. But this time she lingered, holding one of them close, realizing how routine had become a quiet form of intimacy. She was no longer just caring for a patient. She was witnessing a man being rebuilt from the inside out. Later that evening, as golden light spilled into the hallway, Ethan called for her. When she entered the room, he was seated on the edge of his bed, hands folded, gaze distant. "I need to ask you something," he said. Emma paused, curious. "What is it?" "Would you come with me to the company gala next week?" She blinked. "You want me to go with you to that?" "It's not just about appearances," he said quickly, sensing her hesitation. "I need someone I trust there, someone who's seen the worst of me and didn't run." Emma bit her lip, unsure. "You know that crowd. They'll look at me and see a maid." "Then let them," he replied. "I'll be standing next to you. That should say more than enough." She agreed, not because she felt ready, but because something in Ethan's voice told her he wasn't either. And maybe, just maybe, they could face it together. Preparations for the gala stirred something unfamiliar in Emma. Clara, the housekeeper turned stylist, brought in a selection of dresses. Emma stood before the mirror in a navy blue gown, her hair swept up, makeup subtly applied. For a moment she didn't recognize herself. Ethan appeared at the doorway, dressed in a tailored suit that finally hung right again, now that he'd regained his strength. When he saw her, he stopped. "You look radiant." Emma laughed nervously. "That's a bit much." "No," he said, stepping closer, his eyes lingering. "It's the truth." On the night of the gala, the car ride was quiet, save for the hum of the city lights passing outside. Emma sat rigid, clutching her purse. Ethan reached over, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. "They'll stare," she said. "Let them," he repeated softly. The ballroom was as opulent as Emma feared. Gilded walls, chandeliers dripping with crystal, music from a live quartet filling the air. Eyes turned the moment they entered, some with confusion, some with judgment, others with outright disdain. Emma straightened her back. Ethan leaned in and whispered, "You belong here more than any of them." He introduced her to colleagues and investors, each time saying, "This is Emma," with no explanation, no justification, as if her presence alone was reason enough. One woman, a long-time associate of Ethan's, gave a tight smile. "So this is the mystery woman. We've all been dying to meet her." Emma returned the smile, cool and confident. "I'm sure you have." The woman blinked, caught off guard, and Ethan laughed, loudly, joyfully. It was the first time in months. As the evening progressed, Ethan was called on stage to deliver a speech. He hadn't prepared one, but he stood tall, walking unassisted, and faced the crowd. "I've made a lot of decisions in my life," he began. "Some smart, some strategic. But the one decision that changed everything didn't come from a boardroom. It came from a hospital bed, after I'd lost almost everything." He paused, eyes searching for Emma in the crowd. She was there, standing near the edge, heart pounding. "I was given a second chance. Not just at life, but at becoming someone worth remembering. And that second chance came in the form of a woman who showed me more courage, integrity, and grace than I'd ever seen. There was a long silence, and then applause. Not thunderous, but real. After the gala, as they stood in the corridor waiting for the car, Emma turned to him. "That speech, did you mean it?" "Every word," he said. "I'm not sure I know how to be someone like that for you." "You already are," he replied. Their eyes locked, and something passed between them, an unspoken promise neither was ready to voice, but both could feel. The following days were quieter, filled with routine and reflection. Ethan returned to his company part-time, but things had changed. He delegated more. He listened. He showed patience to mistakes and curiosity in places he once had only control. One afternoon, Emma found him in the garden, sitting under the olive tree she had trimmed months ago. "I wanted to show you something," he said, holding out a folder. Inside were plans, blueprints, sketches, budgets, a foundation. "A community center. It's in one of the neighborhoods you used to work in," he explained. "A place for single parents to get training, childcare, real support. I'm calling it the Olive Project, after the tree, after you." Emma was speechless. She flipped through the papers, tears stinging her eyes. "This, Ethan, this is everything I ever dreamed of." "It's because of you," he said simply. "You reminded me what power is for." Their bond deepened in the quiet, hours in shared silences and small gestures. Ethan started writing again, something creative, something personal. Emma encouraged it. Lucas visited more often, and Ethan found himself laughing in ways he hadn't since childhood, but with closeness came fear. One night, lying awake, Emma sat by the window, staring at the stars. When Ethan found her there, he said nothing at first, just stood beside her. "I'm scared," she admitted. "This feels too good, like something that's not meant to last." He nodded. "I know that feeling." She looked up at him. "How do you keep moving forward?" "By choosing to believe that sometimes the things that scare us most are the things we need the most." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you'd put in your book." "Maybe I will," he replied. "Maybe I'll write a whole chapter about you." The next morning, a package arrived for Emma. Inside was a manuscript, the first draft of Ethan's memoir. On the dedication page, he had written, "To the woman who bathed me with her hands and healed me with her presence." Emma held the page to her heart, overwhelmed. In a life that had been defined by survival, she had found something unexpected. Someone who saw her, chose her, and allowed her to be seen not for what she'd lost, but for what she had always carried. Inside, winter arrived quietly, draping the city in soft gray skies and chilled air. Inside Ethan's mansion, however, warmth bloomed from places unexpected. Not just from the fireplace that now burned daily in the study, or the kitchen where Emma and Lucas often baked simple, imperfect cookies, but from the rhythms of a household that had learned to breathe again. It had been nearly a year since Ethan's accident, a year since a single mother entered his life with nothing but calloused hands, tired eyes, and a heart 10 times larger than her fears. Now, that same woman stood at the center of his world, not as a caretaker, not as a savior, but as an equal, a partner, the one person who had witnessed his unraveling and stayed long enough to see him rebuild. One snowy evening, Emma sat across from Ethan in the study, Lucas asleep upstairs. The fire crackled, casting golden light on the walls. She was reading the final chapter of Ethan's manuscript, one he hadn't yet let her see. When she finished, she looked up, tears in her eyes. "You wrote about everything," she whispered. "Even the moments I thought you'd forgotten." "I never forgot a thing," Ethan replied. "Especially not the way you looked at me when I was at my lowest." You never looked away. She smiled through her tears, laying the pages down gently. It's not just a book, Ethan. It's a love letter to the man you've become. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady but soft. I want to build more than books with you. Emma stilled. Her heartbeat quickened. I've spent so much of my life building empires with walls around me. But this, he gestured between them, this is the only home that's ever felt real. She held his gaze, searching for any sign of performance, of pretense. There was none. Just a man who had stripped away pride, fear, and control, and was offering something real. I don't need grand gestures, she said, her voice nearly breaking. I just need truth. Then the truth is, he said, reaching for her hand, I love you, and I want to spend my life making up for the time we spent surviving instead of living. He didn't propose that night. Not with a ring, not yet. But something had already been promised. A future where no one needed saving, only choosing. Every day. Weeks passed. The Olive Project opened its doors to the public. Emma was given full leadership of the center. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, she stood in front of reporters and local families, her voice trembling at first, but steadying with every word. I started my journey with empty pockets, and a son who depended on me. I never imagined I'd one day be standing here, offering other single parents the support I once prayed for. This center isn't just a building, it's a promise that no one is too small, too broken, or too poor to matter. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his coat pockets, pride swelling in his chest. She was magnificent, not because he had helped her rise, but because she had never truly fallen. She had simply never been given room to soar. That night after the celebration, Emma found Ethan on the rooftop terrace of the mansion. Snowflakes danced in the air. She walked toward him slowly, and he turned to her with a smile that had softened over time. Less polished, more sincere. "UK." "Didn't say a word during the ceremony," she teased. "I didn't need to," he replied. "You said everything that mattered." She joined him at the edge of the balcony, the city glittering beneath them. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, voice thoughtful, "about what it means to belong. I spent so long thinking I had to buy that feeling, that with enough success, I'd finally earn a place in the world. And now?" Emma asked. "Now I know it was never about earning it. It was about becoming someone who creates belonging for others. Like you do." She looked at him, touched by his growth. This man, once guarded by steel and solitude, had opened himself in ways she'd never imagined. "I have something for you," he added, reaching into his coat pocket. She raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" He pulled out a small velvet box and held it between them. Her breath caught. "It's not a proposal," he said quickly, his voice almost shy. "Not yet. I wanted to give you something that says, thank you for seeing me when I couldn't even see myself." She opened the box slowly. Inside was a delicate pendant, shaped like an olive branch. Simple. Elegant. Beautiful. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Like everything you've been doing lately." He smiled, relief and gratitude washing over him. "I'm trying. Every day." They stood together, snow falling gently around them, neither needing more words. Just the quiet certainty of two people who had fought their way through doubt, pain, and circumstance, and found something lasting. As spring approached, so did the feeling of readiness for something more. Ethan began hosting storytelling nights at the community center, inviting children and parents to hear stories from all walks of life. Emma joined him, often reading aloud from her own journal, sharing the tales she once hid in the quiet corners of her soul. Lucas, now older, started calling Ethan by his first name, not Mr. Ethan anymore. Just Ethan. And sometimes, when they were all seated around the dinner table, laughter bouncing off the walls, Lucas would sneak glances at Ethan, the kind of glances boys give to men they trust. Then one morning, in the garden under the olive tree, Ethan surprised Emma with a picnic. Just the two of them, no event, no cameras, just sunlight, oranges, and jasmine-scented air. "I've been thinking about that question," he said as they shared slices of fruit. "The one you asked me a year ago." "What question?" she asked, genuinely confused. "What it means to truly live." She leaned in, intrigued. "And I think it means this," he continued. "To wake up next to someone who sees you for more than your money, your mistakes, or your status. To be known. And to keep choosing each other, again and again." Emma felt tears form in her eyes, not from sadness, from fullness. "Then let's keep choosing," she said. Later that night, with candles lit and soft jazz playing from an old speaker, Ethan finally knelt down, holding a different velvet box, this time with a ring inside. "I don't need perfection," he said. "I don't need promises of forever. I just need one more day, with you, and then another, and another. Will you give me that?" Emma nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, to all the days." Their wedding was small, held in the garden under the tree that had grown with them. Friends from the center, colleagues, volunteers, and a now thriving Lucas filled the space with laughter and love. And when they danced, it wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't grand, but it was real. Two souls who had been strangers, then healer and patient, then friends, and now partners, moving as one. In the end, love didn't come in fireworks or fanfare. It came in folded laundry, in shared meals, in pages read aloud, and tea poured quietly. It came in choosing one another, not for who they had been, but for who they became together. And for Ethan and Emma, that was more than enough. Ethan and Emma's story is a profound reminder that true transformation doesn't come from wealth, power, or status, but from vulnerability, love, and the courage to choose each other despite life's broken beginnings. What began as an act of desperation for a single mother turned into a journey of healing for both a wounded billionaire and a woman who had forgotten her own worth. Through humility, emotional growth, and mutual respect, they built a love story rooted in truth, not fantasy. They didn't save each other. They simply chose to walk together, learning how to live and love authentically along the way. The lesson we take from this story is clear. Life's greatest blessings often come disguised as challenges. We must be brave enough to accept what we don't understand, open enough to love beyond appearances, and humble enough to change when life demands it. In a world that often values perfection and image, it is connection, empathy, and resilience that truly endure. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply reminded you of the power of love and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep creating more heartfelt stories that touch lives and uplift hearts. Thank you for being here.